Hey guys, tonight we travel to a place where summer days can melt your patience by breakfast, and sand seems to radiate from every pore of the earth. Ancient Persia. Imagine this. You're wandering through a courtyard, your sandals half cooked, from sun-heated stone, the air dry as an overbaked cookie. Even your shadow looks parched. But then, a breeze brushes your cheek, and it's cool. Not just cooler, but weirdly, deliciously refreshing. You turn the corner, and there it is. A mud brick dome squatting like a humble spaceship in the middle of the desert. Step inside, and the temperature drops. You blink. Are you dreaming? Nope. You've just walked into an ancient Persian refrigerator. This story is going to feel a bit surreal. It's about ancient engineering so clever you'll wonder if time travelers were involved. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a day hauling ice here, but at least tonight you don't have to. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Always love seeing our sleepy little history crew from all over the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the baked edges of an oasis town, perhaps Yazd or Kashan, some 2,000 years ago. It's the kind of hot where even the palm trees look tired. Camels squint under the sun, and the air smells like clay, sunburned goat, and somehow fresh bread. Always fresh bread. And yet, right there in the middle of it all, people sip on something cool, almost smugly. How? It starts with understanding the enemy. The ancient Persians didn't just tolerate the desert, they studied it. They knew where the wind came from when the sun hit hardest, how the humidity changed after midnight. These weren't just sun-hardened nomads. They were data collectors in robes, and they built accordingly. Homes had thick mud brick walls that held in the cool and kept out the heat. Courtyards were shaded with grapevines. Basements, called sardabs, were dug deep underground, where the temperature rarely budged above mild sweater weather. But their pièce de résistance? The yakchal. It means ice pit, which is both exactly right and criminally underwhelming. Imagine a giant inverted beehive, about 20 feet tall, smooth on the outside, sometimes coated with a paste of ash, egg whites, sand, and goat hair. An ancient insulator so good it could probably beat your double-glazed windows. The walls were often 2 meters thick at the base. Inside, the floor dipped down into a pit where ice was either brought in or, when conditions were right, made during winter nights using shallow pools that froze under the open sky. Once harvested, the ice would be packed with straw and insulated, even further, sometimes lasting until the next winter. Historians still argue whether the yakchals were mostly for elite use or if entire communities benefited from them seasonally. The truth is probably both, depending on how close you lived and who you knew, but perhaps the strangest thing isn't that it worked. It's that it worked so silently. No gears, no fans, no humming, just shape, shadow, and patience. There are letters from early European travelers, long before fridges were a thing, writing in stunned admiration at these structures. One described entering a yakchal and being soothed to his bones. Another called it the most unnatural thing to feel frost in July. You peek out from under your headscarf, sweat pooling at your lower back, and wonder if you're hallucinating. Nope, just really, really clever desert architecture. And it wasn't just about the chill, it was about survival. Ice meant longer lasting. Food, medicine that didn't spoil, relief for fevers, a way to woo diplomats, and yes, cold treats. But we'll get to those later. One of the most remarkable quirks? These structures often stood alone, somewhat ceremonially. They looked like temples. Some even had little shrines or inscriptions. It's as if they weren't just practical. They were revered. And honestly, Who wouldn't revere a building that let you bite into a frozen plum in the middle of July? The truly uncanny part is that these things still exist. Some have stood for centuries, quietly refusing to melt. You run, your hand along the curve of a yachtchail, feel the grit of centuries-old plaster. Somewhere nearby, a donkey snorts, unimpressed. You, however, are absolutely mesmerized. Tomorrow, you might have to help chip blocks of ice and haul them up that narrow entrance ramp with a sled made of palm wood and rope. But not tonight. Tonight, you lie down on a straw mat in the shadow of that great dome, listening to the wind rattle the reeds outside. Maybe, just maybe, you'll dream in snowflakes. You wake to the sound of a donkey chewing somewhere nearby and the muffled coo of a desert pigeon nesting in the crevice of a sun-dried wall. The sun hasn't quite risen yet, but already the courtyard is shaking off its nighttime cool like a blanket that's gotten too cozy. You stretch, your joints popping like old saddle leather, and glance at the yachtchaw. Still there, still inscrutable. But today, you're not just lounging in its shade. Today you get a proper tour. The town you're in, tucked away in the ancient heart of Persia, maybe Yazd, maybe Kerman, is more than just a collection of sun-beaten homes. It's a miracle of desert urban planning. And beneath your dusty sandals lies its quiet genius, a city built not just on sand, but around the idea of resisting it. The first thing you notice, once you pass the low doorways and thick, shadowy halls, is the city's rhythm. Homes are clustered around internal courtyards, places not just to gather, but to survive. These courtyards often host a tree or two, a pomegranate maybe, or a stubborn fig. There's a small pool of water in the center, purely decorative in theory, but in practice it cools the air by a few degrees, enough to make the difference between a nap and a heat stroke. Now here's the kicker. The city itself is a cooling machine. Its alleyways twist and narrow, not just because someone laid bricks while drunk on fermented goat's milk. No, they're designed that way on purpose. The maze-like layout creates wind channels, snaking paths that funnel breezes down into living quarters. There's a method to the madness, and underground, oh, it's a whole other world. Basements are dug deep, some of them dropping 2 or even 3 stories below the surface. The walls are lined with a mix of limestone and clay, which stay cool even in the cruelest summers. A few homes connect these basements directly to yachtchaws via narrow storage tunnels, essentially turning the house into a natural walk-in freezer. Historians still debate how much of this layout was engineered for temperature control versus security and aesthetics. But let's be honest, when a design keeps your apricots from turning into raisins, who cares what the original intent was? You duck into one of these homes and the temperature drops instantly. It's not dramatic, not like walking into a supermarket, but it's enough to make your neck unclench. The old man who lives here, a spice merchant with eyebrows like desert shrubbery, offers you a seat and a sip of mint water. The cup sweats, not from heat, but from coolness. How does it stay cold, you ask? He shrugs, smiles, and points to the wall. Because we respect the earth, he says, as if that explains everything. Which, in a way, it does. Now let's talk materials. These buildings aren't random piles of dirt. They're made from kesht, sun-dried mud bricks mixed with straw and sometimes goat hair. Lightweight, insulating, and surprisingly durable. Kesht walls are often a foot or more thick. They keep heat out during the day and release a gentle warmth at night, like a reverse electric blanket. Some roofs are domed, not for drama, but for physics. Hot air rises, remember? So, a domed ceiling pulls the worst of the heat up and away from your suffering, sweaty forehead. And then there's the color. Ever wonder why so many desert cities look the same dusty shade of beige? It's not a design choice. It's a strategy. Light-colored walls reflect sunlight rather than absorb it. Basically, every surface is trying not to fry you. You step outside, into an alley just wide enough for a camel to consider and look up. Above you, wooden beams poke from wall to wall like someone started a bridge and gave up. These are shadaf, makeshift sunshades. In some places, woven reed mats hang down, catching the harshest glare. It's a city that wears sunglasses and a hat. Even the public buildings play along. Bathhouses are placed near qanats, the subterranean. Aqueducts we'll talk about soon, so they can access cool water directly. Mosques have courtyards that double as chill zones, with shade trees and cool marble underfoot. One of the more delightful details? Rooftop sleeping. In the hottest months, families drag their beds to the roof, where night winds offer relief. Kids count stars. Adults mumble bedtime stories. Occasionally, someone rolls off in their sleep and lands in a bale of straw with only their dignity bruised. You take a moment to sit in one of these courtyards just as the sun finally peeks over the skyline. You feel it first on your toes, sharp and sudden, like a match being struck. But the coolness still lingers in the stone under you, stubborn as a sleepy cat. This city didn't fight the desert. It collaborated with it. And there's a lesson, there maybe, about patience, about not trying to brute force your way through every challenge, about paying attention to wind, to light, to how water wants to flow. You let your eyes close. The breeze brushes past your ear like a lullaby with a punchline. In the distance, someone shouts about melons, sleepy, sweaty, sustainable Persia, somehow making the desert livable, and occasionally even delightful. You're standing in the shimmering haze of midday, peering up at a mud brick dome that looks like a leftover prop from a minimalist science fiction movie. Except this prop has been holding ice in the desert since before Rome had plumbing. Welcome to the Yachtjail. It's your third visit today, and honestly, you're still not over it. This strange beehive-shaped building, with its curved lines and squat presence, is the centerpiece of ancient Persian cooling tech. It isn't trying to impress you with grandeur. No fancy mosaics or golden domes, just thick, deliberate walls and a whisper of engineering magic. Still, it commands your attention. Let's talk construction. The Yachtjail wasn't just built, it was carefully sculpted. Workers would spend months, even years, shaping the outer structure from mud brick and plaster. The walls were often thicker. Then a grown man is tall at the base, sometimes 2 meters thick because the goal wasn't just insulation, it was time control. Thick walls meant the interior temperature changed so slowly that summer heat barely stood a chance. The material used was called sarouj, a secret sauce blend of sand, clay, goat hair, lime, and sometimes ash or egg whites. It was water-resistant, mold-resistant, and, judging by how some yachtjails still stand today, absolutely apocalypse-resistant. Inside, it's not exactly spacious. There's a pit in the center, sometimes 8 feet deep, where ice was stored, layered with straw or sawdust. Surrounding that were smooth, gently sloping walls, almost echoless. Step inside, and it's like the desert disappears. The air is still, heavy, clean. You sit on the edge of the pit, peering down. It's not winter now, so there's no ice at the moment. Just a slightly damp, earthy scent and the cool touch of shadow. It's surprisingly peaceful, like being inside a clay teacup. Now, how did they make the ice in the first place? That's the cleverest part. In winter, when desert nights dipped below freezing, the Persians would dig shallow pools just a few inches deep, beside or in front of the yachtjail. They'd pour water into these trays and wait. No machinery. No spells, just physics. Because of the low humidity and cloudless skies, the heat from the water radiated upward into the frigid night. The water would freeze by dawn, forming thin sheets of ice. Workers, some wearing nothing but sandals, patience, and slightly questionable head wraps, would break these sheets, stack them carefully, and carry them inside. Layer by layer, the pit filled, ice, straw, ice, straw. And they didn't just do this once, they did it every single night of the cold season. A kind of manual refrigeration schedule, equal parts devotion and frostbite. Historians still argue whether this method was widespread across all classes or limited to cities with strong bureaucratic coordination. Some suggest that ice making was state-organized, perhaps even taxed or managed like grain. Others believe wealthier homes had private yakchals, or shared communal ones run by local guilds of, yes, ice handlers. By the time summer came rolling in, villagers could walk to their local yakchal and, if lucky, retrieve a cool slab for their food, drinks, or ceremonial needs. Imagine a wedding feast in July with a chilled fruit platter. Royalty likely had enough ice to cool their wine, press against their temples, and throw at annoying court poets. There's even speculation that military campaigns used yakchal storage to pack perishable goods. Picture a caravan marching through searing, salt flats, and someone at the back is munching on cool cucumber slices. That's morale. But let's not forget the social life around these ice domes. You aren't just storing cubes, you're creating a gathering place. Children sneak peeks through the entryway, daring each other to go inside. Old men stand outside, arguing about who stacked ice better 40 years ago. Occasionally, a young couple might pass by, pretending not to be on a walk specifically near the coolest spot in town. And let's not romanticize too much. Yakchals needed maintenance. Someone had to patch cracks, drain melted water, fight off mildew, and sometimes, very carefully, remove a mouse or two. Usually, these were boys from nearby households, eager, reckless, and occasionally damp. The labor was seasonal, but essential. A bad yakchal year could mean spoiled food, wasted effort, or worse, a very cranky sultan. You step back outside, blinking in the harsh light. The dome's shadow stretches across the dusty ground, reminding you of a sundial. A cooler than average sundial, but still, it's humbling. This is a refrigerator made with no electricity, no freon, no compressor coils. Just shape, shade, and the occasional goat hair. And unlike your fancy kitchen model, this one won't beep at you when the door is left open. You wander off, the yakchal shrinking behind you, still proud and round like a content belly. The sun's brutal now, but you've still got a chill clinging to your sleeves, as if the building gave you a souvenir. And that's just the beginning of what the Persians could do with heat, ice, and a little stubborn brilliance. You're not hallucinating. That is a man scraping frost off a stone slab while the desert sun gleams behind him like an angry eye. He's not a magician. He's just really good at waking up early and living in the right kind of place. This morning, you've been roped into a winter ritual. It's ice harvest season in ancient Persia, and you've got a flat wooden paddle, an aching back, and the dubious honor of helping make snow in the desert. Welcome to the miracle of seasonal ice collection, ancient style. The process, though primitive by modern standards, is nothing short of genius. Just outside the yakchal, workers have dug a large, shallow trench, perhaps no deeper than your hand. Water is carefully poured into this earth-lined pool every evening during the coldest months, usually from late December to early February, when the night air is frigid enough to do the work. The pool is positioned with strategic precision, north-facing walls to shield it from daytime sun, and low thermal mass to ensure heat vanishes into the dry night air. It's the kind of micromanagement you'd expect from a NASA launch, not a mud trench in ancient Iran. By dawn, the surface has frozen into thin, brittle ice. Workers in layered robes and sheepskin boots, if they're lucky, walk carefully along the edge, avoiding cracks. The older ones always know where to step. The younger ones mostly learn the hard way. The ice is broken into manageable chunks and passed along in a line of burlap-wrapped arms, sometimes on crude sleds, sometimes on shoulders, though one guy insists on balancing it on his head like a fruit bowl, purely for flair. Historians still argue whether these trenches were a community-wide effort or a task assigned to certain families. Some believe the city managed the process like a harvest, complete with quotas, tallies, and celebration nights. Others suggest it was a bit more chaotic. Whoever got there first got the best ice. As the slabs reach the yak chal, they're lowered into the pit using ropes and pulley systems, or sometimes just brute manpower. Between each layer, workers stuff straw, reeds, or dry leaves to create air pockets and reduce melting. It's hard work, cold work, but it's also weirdly festive. Someone starts humming a tune. Someone else swears when they drop a block on their toe. There's laughter, too, especially when a goat wanders too close and slips into the shallow trench, coming out looking deeply betrayed by the laws of physics. You wipe your brow, surprised at how much you're sweating despite the cold air. That's the desert for you, climate with commitment issues. The payoff, however, is undeniable. As winter wanes and spring tiptoes in, the yak chal stands ready, full, sealed, and waiting to deliver sweet, frosty relief to the coming furnace of summer. But ice wasn't just for drinking. No, the Persians were ahead of their time in chilled cuisine. Cue falude, one of the world's earliest frozen desserts. Think thin rice noodles, rose water, lime juice, and semi-frozen syrup, all blended into a slushy delight that somehow manages to be refreshing, perfumed, and slightly confusing on the first bite. You watch a vendor prepare it in a shaded corner of the bazaar, churning the mix by hand in a brass bowl embedded in packed ice. Nearby, a little girl with pomegranate-stained fingers waits impatiently, hopping from foot to foot. Faluda wasn't just a treat, it was a cultural flex, a way to show off your access to rare ingredients and rare temperatures. A dish like this didn't exist in Europe for centuries. In Persia, it was available to anyone with a little coin and the willingness to brave the sticky midday crowds. Some accounts suggest it was even served to royalty in elaborate ceremonies, often garnished with herbs or flower petals. Picture a grand courtyard, shaded with silken canopies, where a servant presents a bowl of icy noodles to a prince whose turban probably costs more than your entire existence. Meanwhile, everyday folks would gather around ice cellars, buying small chunks for use in drinks or cool compresses. It wasn't uncommon to see people walking with baskets of fruit nestled in straw-lined bowls of yak chal ice, grinning like smug penguins. One fringe theory posits that yak chal ice was sometimes used in primitive medical treatments, cooling fevers, soothing burns, or reducing swelling after unfortunate camel collisions. There's not much hard evidence, but it's entirely plausible. The best part? You didn't need a yak chal to appreciate its impact. Its chill would ripple through the entire community, one frosty pomegranate juice at a time. And as you sip, your own sticky fingers, chilled breath and all, you realize something. The yak chal isn't just a building, it's a promise. That even in the most unforgiving places, someone, somewhere, found a way to turn discomfort into delight, and that someone probably had straw in their shoes and frostbite on their elbows. You're lounging under a mulberry tree, mouth pleasantly numb from a second bowl of faluda, wondering how on earth ancient Persians pulled off frozen dessert without electricity, and more importantly, how they kept it from turning into a sad noodle-flavored puddle. But then again, you're in a land where the people not only bent the desert to their will, they sweetened it. Let's follow this trail of icy delight. As early as 500 BCE, yes, before Alexander the Great had a single dramatic haircut, Persians were already mixing ice with flavor. But faluda wasn't just some rustic snow cone, it had style. You're talking finely shaved ice blended with starch noodles, often made from cornstarch or rice, infused with rose water and a squirt of sour lime. It sounds strange, sure, but so does oat milk if you say it out loud too many times. The dish was stirred constantly over ice to create a slushy, semi-solid texture. Ancient texts mention copper bowls placed into ice-packed vessels, turned slowly by hand, as servants tried not to fall asleep mid-stir. Some historians believe this dessert had ritual importance, offered at Nowruz, the Persian New Year, or other celebrations involving, you guessed it, people trying not to burst into flames from the heat. Others argue it was more of a high-class indulgence, served in garden parties that involved far too many poets and the occasional lute solo. One account describes the Persian elite holding summer feasts beneath pergolas of jasmine, where courtesans passed out chilled fruit and perfumed ice. You imagine reclining on cushions, sipping sour cherry juice, with faluda served in delicate bowls made of polished horn or glazed ceramics. Across the courtyard, someone recites a poem that may or may not be a thinly veiled complaint about their cousin. It wasn't just the flavor, it was the drama. This cooling luxury wasn't limited to desserts either. Cold drinks, sharbat, were a whole genre of refreshment. Rosewater and mint were just the beginning. Add tamarind, barberry, cucumber, or even vinegar and sugar if you were feeling spicy. Served in copper pitchers lined with ice chips from the yak chal, sharbat became a soothing staple. Some scholars suggest vendors in city squares hawked sharbat like today's food trucks, complete with tin cups, crushed ice, and the occasional spat about whose recipe was better. There's even a fringe theory that early versions of soda fountains were inspired by Persian sharbatkhaneh, cold drink houses set up during festivals. And then there's the myth, half whispered in corners of desert towns, of a traveling vendor who made an iced drink so good that a prince tried to knight him, only to realize knights weren't really a Persian thing. Still, he got a new pair of shoes out of it. You walk through a marketplace, following the faint clink of metal ladles and the rustle of straw fans. On one corner, a woman stirs a clay jug of something milky and cold, her hands moving with the kind of confidence that says she's cooled down hotter days than this one. In her stall hangs a line of carved wooden spoons and dried rose petals. She hands you a small bowl of tokme sharbati, basil seed drink, served cold, with the seeds swollen and gelatinous like tiny floating pearls. It's weirdly good, like drinking floral bubble tea from a dream about a garden, and it all circles back to the humble yak chal. Without the slow, silent labor of ice storage, none of this was possible. No chilled desserts, no refreshing drinks, no poets finding new metaphors for how heat is like heartbreak. And here's a fun little twist. The Persian word for ice, yak, eventually lent itself to regional dialects across Central Asia, even influencing the term yak chal beyond Persia's borders. Some modern engineers today study these ancient techniques for their potential in sustainable architecture. Because let's be honest, solar-powered cooling is just a fancy modern name for what Persian engineers were doing with mud, geometry, and stargazing donkeys 2,500 years ago. And while historians debate whether falude was truly invented in the Achaemenid era or a slightly later development from the Parthian period, the core idea remains marvelously unchanged. Take what nature gives you, twist it slightly, then add sugar and rose water. You finish your drink, ice cubes now almost melted, and look at the people around you, laughing, sweating, sipping, fanning themselves with scraps of old scrolls. A vendor dumps fresh ice into a cistern with the ceremony of a priest offering incense. It hits you then that this entire culinary tradition was never about luxury. It was about claiming joy from the jaws of discomfort, about finding a way to smile in the heat, and about proving once again that the best things in life come with a little chill, even if it means getting up before sunrise to scrape ice off the desert floor. You're climbing stairs that are just narrow enough to question their commitment to safety. Each step is sun-warmed, worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet. Your guide, a teenager who insists he's not impressed by anything, waves lazily, upward. "That's the Badgir," he says, as if you should already be applauding. You squint at the structure ahead, a tall, rectangular tower jutting from the roof like a chimney in reverse. Slotted vents line each side, and something about it just feels attentive. This isn't just architecture, it's a conversation with the sky. Welcome to the Badgir, the Persian wind catcher. At first glance, it looks like an oversized birdhouse, or perhaps a very shy lighthouse. But step closer and you'll feel it. A draft, gentle but undeniable, brushing past your cheeks. Not a gust, a whisper. The kind of breeze that seems to be asking permission to cool you down. The design is deceptively simple. Each side of the Badgir is open at the top, catching any available wind and funneling it downward through internal shafts. The hot air rising inside the home is pushed out through these same vents, creating a continuous current. It's like living in a reverse straw, minus the noise. Historians still argue whether this invention predates similar cooling systems in Egypt, or whether the Persians refined an older concept into something uniquely powerful. Either way, by 1000 CE, cities like Yazd had skylines dotted with these towers, like an army of chimneys breathing backwards. You're ushered inside a traditional home to see the full system in action. Below the tower, a shallow indoor pool sits in a central room, its surface rippling gently as cooled air skims across. The effect? Delicious. The air is 10 degrees cooler in here than outside, and you didn't flip a single switch. And here's the wild part. This was passive cooling. No motors, no compressors, just clay, wind, and geometry. The Persians had literally built their homes to breathe. In wealthier homes, wind catchers were combined with underground tunnels called qanats. More on those soon. So the wind passing over water added humidity to the otherwise bone-dry desert air. It's not just cool, it's moisturizing. Your elbows have never felt so respected. You press your palm to the plastered wall and feel the faint chill it holds. Somewhere beneath your feet, cool water flows silently. Above, the tower hums gently, its openings angled to catch the shifting breeze. And lest you think this was a one-size-fits-all miracle, think again. The Badgirs came in styles. Single-sided, for consistent breezes. Four-sided for the full directional treatment. Some even had internal baffles to adjust flow based on the time of day, season, or mood of whoever was in charge of ventilation that week. There's even evidence that some wind catchers could be closed during sandstorms using sliding panels or weighted cloth. Practical and dramatic. Like the HVAC system of a Bond villain's desert hideout. Outside, the towers cast long, geometric shadows across the rooftops. Children run beneath them, chasing the flapping tails of their tunics. A cat naps in the shade of a water jug, blissfully unaware it's experiencing one of the oldest forms of indoor climate control. One fringe theory, admittedly a romantic one, suggests that some Badgirs were designed not just for function, but also for sound. That the wind passing through them could produce a subtle whistle or low hum, like a lullaby only the building could hear. Could be myth, could be a bored 12th century poet trying to flirt with a mason. You imagine living here centuries ago, sprawled on a reed mat under the central dome, sipping iced sharbat, while wind spirals gently down the shaft above you. No fans, no electricity bills. Just architecture so considerate it feels like a personal butler made of bricks. Of course, the system wasn't flawless. On windless days, the air grew sluggish. Some homes compensated by splashing more water into their central pools, hoping for a little extra evaporation magic. Others simply accepted that you can't win every argument with the sky. But the Badgir wasn't just about comfort. It symbolized ingenuity, adaptation, and the refusal to be roasted into extinction. In an environment where heat was the law, the Persians wrote exceptions into the blueprints. Today, modern architects still study Badgir structures for sustainable design models. Energy-efficient cooling systems in eco-homes? A direct descendant. It turns out that green energy sometimes comes in mud brick and a very persuasive breeze. You climb back down, each step slightly cooler than the last. The teenager finally cracks a smile. "Nice, right?" he mutters, as if the entire desert hasn't just whispered a love letter through architecture. You nod, cheeks flushed, not from heat but from awe, and somewhere in that wind, still dancing down stone corridors. And tickling ancient rugs, you swear you hear it, a yawn. You step into the shadow of a dome so thick you half expect to hear your own thoughts bounce back at you. The air is still, deliberately still. You breathe in. It's cool, slightly damp with a hint of earth and old straw. Not unpleasant, just engineered. This isn't just good luck or divine intervention. It's math. You're inside the yakchal again, and this time you're paying attention to its insides. Not just what it stores, but how it stores it. Let's talk geometry. From the outside, it looks like a giant upside-down cone, but from within, it reveals its cleverness. The walls slope outward as they rise, designed not for aesthetic elegance, but to minimize sun exposure during the hottest hours of the day. The angle? Not random. Ancient engineers tested and refined it over generations, experimenting with shadow patterns, wind flow, and thermal inertia. The deeper you go, the cooler it gets. The underground chamber, typically dug several meters below the surface, is where the true alchemy happens. It's shaped like a bowl, wide at the top, gently curving to a low central point. The idea? Let cooler air settle. Warm air stays above, trapped by the narrow entry shaft, where it's eventually expelled through a strategically placed vent. Or, if you've got a luxury model, an attached badger. One quirk, the materials. These weren't your average bricks. The Persians used sarouj, a type of composite plaster that could withstand serious weathering. A mix of clay, sand, lime, egg whites, goat hair, and ash. Yes, like someone baked a very weird but very durable cake. This made the walls not only insulative but water resistant. It was, in short, desert Tupperware, and they knew it. Builders treated the process with ritualistic care. It's said that some construction teams wouldn't begin work until the lunar calendar aligned just right. Part superstition, part observation. They believed certain days brought better setting temperatures for the plaster mix. Historians still debate whether this was scientific insight disguised as ritual or just really enthusiastic astrology. The walls were sometimes layered like sediment, each section allowed to dry before the next was added. This gave the structure strength and a faintly marbled look. If you press your hand against it, you can feel a subtle texture, like dried waves or animal hide stretched taut. And then there's the insulation. Straw, reeds, dry leaves. Anything, organic and breathable, was layered with the ice, but also packed into crevices between the outer wall and inner chamber in some larger yakshals. These pockets of insulation helped maintain internal temperatures even as outside heat soared to oven-grade levels. Think of it as ancient Persian double glazing, minus the glass, and plus a lot of itchy elbows. You spot a little niche in the wall, possibly for tools, or perhaps for a lamp. Some yakchals had small alcoves where candles or oil lamps could be placed. Not for light, no one needed a late-night ice run, but as a humidity indicator. The flame told you everything you needed to know about airflow. Flickering, too humid, steady, perfect. Incredibly, these passive design elements could maintain internal temperatures as low as 5 degrees, about 41 degrees, even when outside conditions scorched. Above 40 degrees, 104 degrees, not bad for a bunch of goat-haired mud pies, right? Some fringe scholars argue that a few yakchals even used early vacuum techniques, like creating tight-sealing doors and vents to slow melting. It's a bit of a stretch, and no one's found a clear smoking gun of airtight Persian Tupperware tech, but the idea persists in certain circles of architectural archaeology. You shuffle along the curved edge of the chamber, imagining the blocks of ice that once filled this space. It's empty now, but your mind fills in the blanks, row upon row of glittering slabs, stacked like bricks of chilled memory. There's a story carved faintly into one part of the wall, a name, a date, a tiny symbol of a bird. Maybe the signature of the builder, maybe graffiti, maybe just someone trying to say, I was here and it was cool. The acoustics are strange. You speak and your voice loops back to you, softened and curled like smoke. Some theorize this was intentional, that yakchals were designed to muffle outside noise, creating a calm, temperature-stable environment. Others think it's a happy accident. Either way, it's undeniably soothing. You sit on the edge of the pit, staring upward. The entrance, high above, frames a slice of blazing sky. It looks distant, like a memory of heat you no longer need to worry about. Down here in this carefully engineered cave of clay and shadow, you could almost forget the sun exists. It's not just a building, it's a philosophy. One that says, what if, instead of fighting the heat, we just worked around it? You stretch out on the straw mat laid near the wall, the stone beneath radiating the calm of centuries. A breeze snakes down the narrow entrance. You breathe in, cold, clean, and whispering secrets of geometry. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the numbers singing. You emerge from the yakchal, blinking like you've been inside a dream, or maybe a very well-designed clay igloo. The desert sun slaps your face gently, like a waiter reminding you to tip. Around you, the market is stirring. It smells like turmeric, apricots, and just a faint whisper of donkey. Welcome to the bazaar, and guess what? Even here, in this riot of colors and sounds, the presence of cold, of yakchals and their quiet miracles, lingers in every clay jug and chilled cup. You wander through rows of merchants yelling half-hearted sales pitches between gulps of cold water. Piles of herbs tumble from baskets. Copper trays of dried dates glitter in the sunlight. But tucked between stalls, strategically shaded by fabric awnings, are the real gems, the drinks vendors. Each has their own version of sharbat, and every one claims theirs is the original, of course. Rose water with crushed ice, tamarind syrup served in earthenware mugs, watermelon juice chilled in straw-packed jars. You can hear the clink of ice chips long before you spot the cups. And where did that ice come from? That's right, yakchal deliveries. Just before dawn, a cart trundled through these winding alleys, blocks of straw-wrapped ice sweating under the weight of the sun. The vendors chipped away carefully, feeding the bits into their prized coolers. Historians suggest that in some cities, especially during peak summer, competition for ice became almost ceremonial. There are records, half lament, half brag, of vendors paying premiums for first melt ice, supposedly cleaner, clearer, and colder. One poem even compares the first chips of yakchal ice to moonlight kissed by a holy breeze. Bit dramatic. But hey, branding is everything. You stop at one such stall where an older woman is spooning something yellow and frosty into little ceramic bowls. She sees you hesitate. Try it, she says. Saffron and sour cherry helps with the heat and heartbreak. It's amazing. Slightly floral, with a tart punch and an aftertaste of cool clay. You ask her how she keeps it so cold. She taps the side of a large urn, winks, and says, "The dome still whispers to us." It's more than just good product, it's a whole cooling ecosystem. Take the clay jugs, for example. These aren't just pretty. They're made from porous terracotta that allows slow evaporation, which in turn keeps the water inside several degrees cooler than the surrounding air. Place one in the shade near a breeze, and boom, natural mini fridge. The Persians called them zir jars. Some even hung them from trees to catch more airflow, and the buildings themselves designed to support this vibe. Market stalls hug the east-west axis, minimizing direct sunlight. Overhead, thatch and cloth provide dappled shade. Beneath your feet, the stone is polished from generations of sandals and still holds a sliver of last night's cool. In wealthier parts of town, merchants operate from within caravanserais, massive, inns with shaded courtyards and water features. These weren't just places to trade. They were architectural oases, designed with Yakchal adjacency in mind. Ice from the storage domes was sometimes delivered directly to these inner sanctums, ensuring that even travelers just off the camel trail could sip chilled wine while scratching their sunburned ankles. And then there's the gossip. Some vendors claim that one bazaar had a secret deal with a Yakchal caretaker, exclusive early morning access in exchange for free snacks. Another says a rival poisoned his ice supply with bitter herbs, not to kill, just to ruin the flavor profile for a week. Historians haven't confirmed these tales, but they keep popping up in travelogues, like ancient Yelp reviews with extra drama. One scholarly debate even circles around the idea that ice distribution in large cities was partially political. Was it first come, first served? Or did nobles, religious leaders, and military officers get priority? Some believe there were ice taxes, where a portion of every winter's harvest went straight to the palace. Others think it was run by informal guilds, networks of ice haulers and Yakchal stewards who decided pricing, supply chains, and who got the best frost. As you sip your second bowl of sour cherry slush, you imagine the arguments. You gave him 2 blocks yesterday. He's getting married. So, I had a nosebleed and 4 priests coming for lunch. Ancient bureaucracy, as always, walked hand in hand with pettiness. But through it all, the market thrived. You could tell which. Vendors were doing well by how loud their drinks clinked. The more ice you had, the more customers stayed. And the more they stayed, the more they bought. Cold treats, yes, but also rugs, spices, maybe even a copper pitcher shaped like a lion for no reason at all. The desert heat still looms above, heavy and relentless. But down here, under the tarps, and domes and wind catchers, with a mouthful of frosty sweetness and a breeze curling past your ankles, you realize something. This is not survival, it's comfort, crafted from clay and cunning. You're following a silk-robed man through a high-walled alley, his sandals slapping against the dusty stone with a rhythm that says, "I'm rich, but I still walk fast." His name? Probably something impressive. His beard? Absolutely impeccable. His destination? A courtyard that smells faintly of roses, figs, and cool ambition. Welcome to the private ice rooms of Persia's elite. Not everyone had a Yakchal in their backyard, of course, but the wealthiest households, especially in cities like Shiraz or Isfahan, often had access to what could only be described as boutique refrigeration. These weren't full domes, but smaller chambers or underground vaults attached to the main home, fed by deliveries from the big communal Yakchals, the family. Your visiting today has one such chamber, and it's shockingly understated. No golden doors, no silk drapes, just a small, squat door barely higher than your chest, half hidden behind a row of potted basil and thyme. You duck in, heart still pounding from the sun, and the air changes. Instantly, it's like stepping into a sigh. Inside, the chamber is lined with pale plaster. The floor dips slightly, and straw mats cover the ground. In the center, a low box, wooden, reinforced with brass and sealed with clay paste around the edges. Your host lifts the lid and reveals, ta-da, ice, still solid, glinting faintly. In the dim light, he gestures proudly like a man showing off a newborn goat. For fruits, he says, and guests, this isn't for everyday use. This is status, prestige, proof that your family isn't just wealthy. They're scientifically literate enough to appreciate the cooling arts. Because let's face it, no one casually stores apricots in a desert without flexing a little. Historians have traced numerous references in estate records to ice chests or snow boxes. These weren't literal chests full of snow, but compartments built into homes to preserve perishables and occasionally medicine. Some were even scented, with dried jasmine petals or sandalwood, to prevent musty odors from seeping into the food. And the goodies stored in these elite mini-fridges? Oh, friend, we're talking fruits so delicate they bruised when you looked at them. Cheeses wrapped in fig leaves. Syrups made from quince, mulberry, or tamarind. Thick and chilled just. Enough to make them pour like velvet. A particularly extravagant tradition involved placing rosewater in a silver bowl, resting it atop a slab of ice, and inviting guests to wash their hands in it, as if the room wasn't already dripping with luxury. One fringe account from a 12th century traveler describes a frozen honey pastry served to him in the garden of a minor prince. It had been kept cool inside a shaded vault packed with ice. He called it the most confusing and delightful bite of my life. Scholars still debate what that actually was. Some say a proto-sorbet, others think it was a frozen stuffed date. Either way, it involved ice, patience, and someone with an excessive amount of free time. But ice wasn't only culinary. In noble homes, it also played a ceremonial role. Before major feasts, servants would place shallow bowls of ice in corners of the banquet hall, not for serving, but for cooling the air. Guests seated closest to the bowls were, of course, the most important. A passive portable AC system powered by elite favoritism. There's even some evidence, scattered but tantalizing, that royalty used ice in skin treatments. Not unlike your modern cold rollers, noble women might apply chilled compresses to reduce puffiness or restore one's moonlight glow. One recipe calls for wrapping crushed ice in muslin soaked with lavender and saffron. That's right, ancient. Persia may have invented the spa facial. You step back out into the garden and instantly miss the cool. The air out here isn't hostile, but it is insistent. A reminder of what you just left behind. Birds chatter in fig trees. Somewhere a lute twangs lazily. But all you can think of is that little ice box. Quiet, hidden, precious. It hits you how much effort went into this luxury. The ice itself was collected under freezing skies, stored in domes hand-built over months, then carved and carted in the early hours, packed in straw, protected from heat, hoarded like treasure. All so a prince could have a chilled pomegranate on a Tuesday. And yet, it worked. For the Persian elite, ice wasn't just a refreshment. It was a signal of wealth, yes, but also of intellect, of mastery over nature, of being civilized in the face of climate-induced chaos. The irony? Most of them still sweat through their tunics. You sit beneath a date palm, sipping something sweet and cool from a goblet you're not entirely convinced isn't actual gold. Your host fans himself with a peacock feather, clearly pleased with your awe. You want to say something profound, but instead you just sigh. Nice box. He nods, very solemnly. Yes, we are quite proud. And who wouldn't be? You're now sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, sharing a bowl of chilled melon cubes with a man whose beard is so immaculately oiled it reflects the sunlight like polished walnut. He doesn't smile often, but when he does, you can tell this is a man who knows the true value of a good block of ice. Not because he's a fruit enthusiast, because he's a diplomat. Welcome to the politics of frozen generosity. In ancient Persia, giving someone ice wasn't just a practical gesture. It was diplomatic poetry. A block of yakchal stored ice, delivered midsummer to a friend or ally, was the kind of move that made people talk, and often the right people. Picture this. It's July. The heat is rising like bread dough left out too long. You're a local. Governor receiving a slab of ice from a neighboring satrap, delivered on camelback and wrapped in silk. It's not just cold, it's status. A sign that someone thought you were worth the logistical nightmare of frozen transport. Historians suggest That ice, alongside rare spices and perfumes, became a symbolic gift during periods of fragile alliances. Imagine a peace negotiation ending with a bowl of chilled sour cherry syrup shared under a shaded portico, the two sides nodding thoughtfully as condensation beads on their goblets. Some diplomatic letters even included mentions of ice, whether it had arrived, how fast it had melted, and whether it was clean. Because yes, dirty ice was a diplomatic faux pas. If someone sent you melted slush, it meant either they didn't care or they were sending a message. Here's your lukewarm respect. Enjoy. One famous anecdote, probably embellished over generations, involves a minor prince who presented a rival envoy with an enormous block of ice carved into the shape of a lion. The envoy responded the next day with a gift of sugar-dusted dates carved into a camel. Neither of them blinked. That's diplomacy. Of course, the royals weren't above theatrics either. At one summer banquet hosted by Darius III, yes, the one who later had a very bad time with Alexander the Great, guests were reportedly served iced honeyed wine that had been cooled using snow brought down from the mountains and stored in a secret royal yakchal. The idea of transporting snow hundreds of miles for a single party may sound wasteful, but honestly, have you met royalty? Some scholars believe certain royal yakchals had guards, not just to prevent theft, but to ensure no one tampered with the supply. Rumors of salt sabotage circulated, melting rival ice with sly handfuls of salt. No one could prove anything, of course. But if your bowl of faluda arrived more like a warm soup, you could be sure someone was getting demoted. The gifting didn't stop at nobles. Sometimes ice was used to woo scholars or poets. A freshly iced pitcher of sharbat might land you, a dedication in the next epic poem, or at the very least a particularly flattering simile about your eyebrows. But not all ice gifting was sweet. During tense political seasons, refusing a gift of ice was a serious insult, especially if it was returned unmelted. One legend tells of a governor who sent back a block of ice untouched with a note, "My house is already cool enough." Days later, his rival responded with a delivery of flaming coals. Subtlety was not the strong suit of pre-modern diplomacy. What makes it all fascinating is that the ice itself, so difficult to collect, store, and transport, became a kind of soft power, a means to assert influence, build relationships, or undercut them one chilled plum at a time. Even military leaders got in on the act. During prolonged campaigns, generals sometimes requested yakchal ice be diverted to their camps, not just to preserve rations, but as a morale booster. After all, nothing says, "We'll win this war," like letting your troops sip something cold while the enemy sweats bullets on the other side of the hill. There's a debated theory that during one border skirmish in eastern Persia, ice from a nearby city was hauled overnight in relays to a field tent where two rival warlords met. It arrived just in time to cool their tempers and their fermented pomegranate wine. The result? An awkward but enduring ceasefire and a very good poem about frost and forgiveness. You sit back, the bowl of fruit now empty except for a few sticky seeds. Your diplomatic host offers you a final treat, a sliver of iced fig cake, kept firm in a clay box packed with straw. He doesn't say much. He doesn't have to. The chill speaks for itself. You nod in thanks, understanding now that in Persia, ice wasn't just a marvel of architecture. It was a language. You're on your knees now, lantern in hand, descending into a narrow, stone-lined shaft that smells like wet clay and echoes with the sound of your own skeptical breathing. It's not a crypt. It's not a wine cellar. It's a qanat. And congratulations! You've just entered the ancient Persian underworld of water engineering. It's cooler down here, blessedly so. The temperature drops the deeper you go, and suddenly that sweaty layer on your back feels like an overreaction. You keep walking, hunched over like someone trying not to offend the ceiling, and there it is, the quiet hiss of water. That's the magic of the qanat. This underground aqueduct system is one of Persia's most brilliant, least flashy inventions. A qanat is essentially a gently sloping tunnel that channels groundwater from higher elevations, usually foothills or mountain aquifers, all the way to towns and fields below, using nothing but gravity and an astonishing amount of elbow grease. We're talking tunnels that can run for tens of kilometers, dug entirely by hand, with access shafts every few dozen meters for ventilation, maintenance, and the occasional curious goat. You pause near one such shaft, a shaft that, centuries ago, might have seen a boy lowering a bucket, or a worker resurfacing after hours of darkness, muttering something about ghosts and frogs. The water itself moves quietly, pooling in shallow troughs or flowing through channels carved with uncanny precision. It's cool, crisp, so clean you could drink it, though, just to be safe, your host gently gestures to wait until it's filtered upstream. Probably wise. Here's where things get interesting. Many yakchals were built strategically near qanats. Why? Because cool water flowing through a tunnel several meters underground is nature's free refrigeration boost. In some advanced setups, water from the qanat would pass through chambers beneath the yakchal, enhancing the cooling process and maintaining internal humidity. Historians still debate the exact mechanics. Some argue the water didn't enter the yakchal directly, but was diverted into nearby evaporation pools. Others believe the cool air above the qanat tunnels helped lower ambient temperatures inside storage areas. The truth? Likely a bit of both. Persians were many things, but one thing they never were: lazy with logistics. You squat beside the channel, running your fingers through the stream. It's not fast, but it's persistent, like someone whispering, "I told you this would work," for the last 1,000 years. Now imagine this: teams of engineers digging these tunnels by hand, using only chisels, pickaxes, and buckets, working in darkness, sometimes for months, aligning the slope to drop just 1 meter per thousand over vast distances. Miss the angle, and the water stops, or floods, or just sulks in a puddle halfway through. There are records of master qanat, builders being revered like doctors or mathematicians. Some were even offered tax exemptions or land grants. One man, allegedly named Ghiyath the Digger, was said to have constructed a qanat so precise that a lit candle could burn at the far end, unruffled by wind or change in elevation. Scholars debate whether this is a metaphor or just early marketing. You pass by a small alcove carved into the wall, probably a resting spot, maybe a niche for oil lamps, or just a convenient place to mutter prayers. Some believe rituals were performed here, small offerings of fruit or coins to the spirits of the water, just in case gravity needed encouragement. And above ground, those access shafts you climb down through, they dot the landscape like ancient air vents. From a distance, a desert slope might look oddly pockmarked, until you realize you're staring at a lifeline network beneath your feet. In major cities, qanats fed not only yakchals but also bathhouses, fountains, mosques, and residential gardens. The water was divided with almost obsessive precision, using systems of weirs, stone gates, and distribution basins. Families had assigned hours or flow rates, and violations could lead to, get this, water court. Yes, a real court, with judges and fines and dramatic accusations like "he stole my afternoon drip." Okay, probably in more elegant Farsi. You resurface, blinking at the sudden brightness. The desert hasn't cooled. It never does. But now you know its secret. Below the dust and heat lies a world of cool channels, quiet math, and watery stubbornness. Child skips past you carrying a jug, barefoot and singing. She's headed to a basin fed by the very qanat you just crawled through. She dips the jug, swishes it thoughtfully, then nods to herself like a connoisseur approving a vintage. You watch her walk away, water sloshing gently against the clay, and you realize, in a land where the sun shows no mercy, the Persians didn't wait for clouds. They dug their miracles by hand. You're sitting cross-legged near a patch of shade cast by a camel that looks like it just lost an argument with a palm tree. Around you, soldiers are unpacking bundles of dried apricots and salted goat. It smells like leather and sweat, with just a whisper of vinegar. You're not at a picnic, you're at a war camp, and someone just pulled out a chunk of ice. Wait, what? Welcome to the forgotten logistics of Persian wartime refrigeration. It's easy to imagine ancient warfare as all swords and shouting. But behind every commander was an army of packers, planners, and, yes, ice haulers. In summer campaigns especially, when armies moved through hostile deserts, ice became less a luxury and more a strategic tool. Not just for drinking, but for preserving food, treating wounds, and occasionally flexing on your enemies with a chilled fruit platter. You watch as a young aide unwraps a straw-filled crate and extracts a solid block, still firm and shimmering, in the dry heat. It's destined for the command tent, of course. The rank and file, they'll be lucky to get some cool cucumber juice by sunset. The ice was harvested months earlier, stored in regional yakchals near the campaign route, and then packed with care into mobile crates, double-lined with straw and clay. Caravans of camels and mules, often traveling overnight to avoid melting, ferried these precious blocks across miles of sunburnt terrain. The haulers were usually skilled workers from the cities, paid well and treated with a mix of awe and jealousy by the regular troops. And no, the irony of carrying ice through a desert was not lost on anyone. One fringe theory even suggests that Persian commanders sometimes displayed ice in front of their enemies, leaving chunks outside tents as a psychological tactic. "Look how cool we are literally," the gesture might have said. "Your tents smell like warm goat, but we have chilled melon." Now let's talk food preservation. Ice wasn't just about comfort, it extended shelf life. Troops stored meats and cheeses in clay jars set in small pits lined with straw and, if available, pieces of ice. Perishable fruits like grapes or berries could be transported further, and dairy, so crucial in many Persian diets, stayed usable longer. It meant better morale, fewer sick soldiers, and less frantic foraging. There's some scholarly debate about how widespread these methods were. Some claim only elite units or royal guards had access to field ice storage. Others argue that regional commanders invested in temporary yakchal-like structures near staging areas. These mini-domes were less elegant than city versions, often thrown together from brick and sand, but they served their short-term purpose. Of course, it wasn't all chilled glory. Transporting ice through active war zones meant risking ambush, sabotage, or accidental melting because someone forgot to double-pack the straw. Stories abound of ice shipments arriving half-melted, only to be served as lukewarm puddles in the name of victory. One satirical poem from the Sassanid period, probably written by a grumpy cook, laments the emperor's preference for cold, butter over warm honor. Scholars disagree on whether this is metaphor or just kitchen-related trauma. And what about medicine? Cold compresses became a battlefield remedy. A clean cloth soaked in icy water could reduce swelling, soothe heat stroke, or calm a wounded soldier's shivering rage. Some makeshift surgical tents even had clay basins of melted ice for washing tools. Primitive, yes, but better than nothing. In peacetime, the same ice logistics were redirected toward trade or diplomacy, but during war, these cold routes became arteries of resilience. Victory was not just about swords, it was about supply chains that included straw, goat hair, and a whisper of frost. Then there's the strange case of pickled lemons? No, really. Pickled lemons, stored in jars cooled with yakchal ice, were a popular diplomatic snack during tense negotiations. Tart, refreshing, and slightly alarming to the uninitiated, these citrus bombs were passed around during ceasefire talks, alliance dinners, and royal banquets. Some claim their sourness cut through lies, others say they simply paired well with chilled water and salty gossip. You nibble one now, wincing slightly as the acidity hits your tongue. Nearby, a group of soldiers is telling ghost stories about a haunted ice crate that moaned during transport. Likely a leaky goat bladder, but hey, anything to pass the time. The sun begins to sink behind a dune, casting long shadows across the camp. The camel grunts disapprovingly, and someone fans the command tent with a palm frond the size of a boat paddle. Inside that tent, a general takes a sip from a ceramic cup beaded with condensation. He doesn't smile, but he looks pleased. Outside, the troops keep chewing their dusty apricots, not quite jealous. Not quite. You lie back in the sand, head against your pack, and think. In a world of fire and fury, someone thought to bring ice, and that makes all the difference. You're now watching a procession of camels with the kind of wide-eyed wonder usually reserved for parades or very large dogs wearing hats. Except these camels are carrying ice, yes, literal blocks of it, bundled in straw, swaddled like royal infants, and strapped tightly to wooden sled-like contraptions tied across their humps. This is the Persian desert's version of refrigerated trucking. The camel caravan was the backbone of the Persian Empire's internal cold chain. These weren't just any caravans. They were organized, timed, and operated with a level of coordination that would make your local delivery service weep. And they had one purpose: get the ice from the Yakchal to wherever it needed to be before the sun decided otherwise. It's just after dawn, and the caravan is prepping to leave a smaller desert town. Each camel is carefully loaded with 2 symmetrical bundles, evenly balanced to prevent the poor animal from wandering in tilted regret. The bundles are padded not only with straw, but also with folded felt and layers of burlap soaked in brine to reduce melting. Ingenious? Absolutely. Comfortable? Not remotely. You walk beside the lead handler, a man with sun-leathered cheeks and the kind of mustache that suggests he wrestles eagles for fun. He tells you the route, a 3-day journey to a coastal city with rest stops at 2 relay stations and 1 cursed well. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. It moans sometimes. We don't ask. The journey is both strategic and grueling. The camels walk mostly at night, resting in shaded enclosures during the day. Stops are timed to coincide, with known breezy passes and old qanat-fed oases where water and feed await. Along the way, blocks are inspected, repositioned, and sometimes trimmed for better airflow, though too much trimming and you've just reduced a precious commodity into lukewarm disappointment. Here's where it gets strange. Ice was sometimes escorted. Yes, guards.ice, especially when bound for royal households or high-ranking officials, was considered valuable enough to require armed protection. Bandits existed, of course, but more common were rival factions trying to sabotage shipments. Melt your enemy's ice supply, and suddenly their banquet turns into a lukewarm nightmare. One folktale, often retold by caravan workers, involves a jealous baker who allegedly bribed a driver to accidentally leave a shipment in the sun. The ensuing scandal at a noble wedding led to 4 duels and a new law about ice misconduct. Historians still debate whether this law existed or if it was just a running joke in dusty roadside inns. You pass one of those inns now, a crumbling roadside station where camels are fed, blocks are transferred, and drivers stretch their legs and complain about the price of fermented goat milk. Inside, a ledger hangs on the wall. Dates, weights, destinations. One entry simply reads, "Lost to wind. Apologized to Sultan." You decide not to ask. The relay system wasn't unique to Persia, but few places mastered it so thoroughly. Some larger cities had dedicated ice routes, paths, maintained and funded specifically for cold cargo. These were patrolled, cleaned, and even shaded in certain stretches with trellises strung with grapevines. Imagine strolling through a green tunnel in the middle of the desert, and you've got the vibe. The camels, of course, didn't care about any of this. They just knew the pace, the turns, and where the occasional fig treat was stashed. Their drivers, though, had it memorized. where sand shifted underfoot, where foxes liked to dig near water pits, and which paths looked shorter but secretly weren't. A fun fringe tidbit? Some caravans had jingles. Yes, jingles. Rhythmic chants or melodies, sung softly during travel, not just to pass time but to set a consistent walking rhythm. Some of these songs referenced ice itself, calling it moonstone or sleeping water. One chorus literally translates to, "Hurry, hurry, melt no more, the grapes are waiting chilled and sore. You can't make this up." Well, someone did centuries ago. At night, the caravan rests. Ice is stacked in a conical shelter, like a baby yakchal made of palm fronds and wet cloth, designed to retain coolness until the next leg begins. Fires are kept low, conversations hushed, and always someone keeps watch. Not for bandits, for foxes. They're clever, persistent, and absolutely fascinated by the scent of straw and salty ice. By the time the caravan nears its destination, perhaps a bustling coastal town, only about 60% of the original ice remains. And that's considered a win. Enough for the markets, the nobles, and the obligatory religious feast involving chilled grapes and a long poem about snow. You help unload a block, your arms numb, your tunic soaked, and watch as it's hoisted onto a vendor's slab. Children gather around, marveling at the mist rising from it. One pokes it, shrieks with delight, and runs off yelling something about magic mountains. You smile, knowing better. It's not magic, it's logistics, and it has a tan. You're now inside the shadowy dome of a yakchal again, but this time, you're not just visiting. You've been hired. Congratulations. You're officially a yakchal maintenance assistant. Your tools? A rope, a broom made of palm twigs, a handful of plaster paste, and more optimism than sense. The first thing you learn? This job is hot, cold, dusty, and weirdly competitive. It's midsummer. The yakchal is doing its noble duty, silently storing whatever remains of last winter's icy harvest. Your job today is simple in theory. Keep it that way. You begin by inspecting the dome from the outside. There's a small crack near the base, barely visible, but dangerous if ignored. The sun has a sneaky way of getting into places it doesn't belong. So you slap on a patch of fresh sarouj, that magical, slightly gross mix of sand, clay, goat hair, lime, and allegedly egg white into the fissure, smoothing it with a flat wooden paddle. The paste sticks. You mutter a prayer to the spirits of insulation and move on. Now the real fun begins. The inside. The entrance is a steep, narrow ramp. You descend carefully, your sandals skidding slightly on the packed straw and smooth plaster. It smells faintly of cold and wet reeds. You're hit by the familiar chill, instant goosebumps, and you get the same feeling you might in a cave. The air feels older than you are, and it probably is. Inside, it's quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears notice themselves. You work in the cool dimness, sweeping out clumps of straw that have gone moldy or ice shavings that didn't get used. You're careful not to disturb the perfectly balanced stacks of ice, still slowly sweating in their straw jackets. You learn quickly, balance matters. Stack ice wrong, and you trap warm air pockets. Let too much melt collect at the bottom? The straw gets soggy, invites mildew, and suddenly you're the guy who ruined next week's wedding dessert supply. Your mentor today is a man named Pahlavan, a wiry veteran with arms like braided rope and a sense of humor so dry it might spontaneously combust. He teaches you how to listen to the dome. Tap here, and the sound tells you if the plaster is holding. Tap there, and it tells you you've hit an air bubble. Miss that bubble? It might become a leak. A leak becomes a drip. A drip becomes a flood. A flood becomes your last paycheck. He grunts approvingly when you spot a shadow in the plaster seam, moisture where there shouldn't be any. Fix it, he says, tossing you a chunk of dried reed. You ask how. He shrugs. with love and goat hair. Later, you learn that one of your tasks includes checking for pests. Oh yes, even ancient refrigerators had critter problems. Mice, beetles, a particularly disrespectful family of lizards who like to nap behind the inner stairs. One fringe tale says that in an especially bad summer, a raccoon, no one knows how it got, there, ate a full tray of royal pickled lemons and passed out next to the last surviving ice slab. The Sultan was not amused. Most yakchals had a team, not just one lonely worker. There were diggers, stackers, sweepers, inspectors, and runners who went to fetch straw or tools. In larger towns, the yakchal had a designated steward called something like barf ban, ice keeper. His word was law. He decided when to open the dome, when to harvest, when to allow access, and who got the premium ice. There's ongoing scholarly debate over whether these positions were inherited or appointed. Some argue that managing a yakchal was a prestigious civil duty. Others say it was punishment for minor crimes. Considering how often the workers sing to themselves about ice gods and cold demons, maybe it was both. What's undeniable is how risky the job was. One misstep on the ramp and you could fall into the pit. One mistake sealing the dome and the summer heat would sneak in, melting weeks of labor overnight. Stories abound of workers fainting from heat exhaustion while patching roofs, or getting trapped during cleaning and having to be hauled out like disgraced laundry. But it wasn't all doom and dampness. You also got first dibs on rejected ice slabs, those with cracks or odd shapes. You could chill your own food or even sell slivers at the market under the table. You also got respect, quiet, begrudging respect, from townsfolk who knew that when the heat became unbearable, it was your goat hair plaster that kept their relief intact. By evening, you and Pahlavan finish sealing the last vent flap with a snug reed mat. The sun is setting, and the dome casts a long, solemn shadow over the courtyard. A child runs by with a bundle of basil, and somewhere, someone starts singing a love song that turns unexpectedly into a recipe for yogurt dip. Pahlavan sits on the stone step sipping cool water from a clay jug and watching you. "You did good," he says, chewing on a piece of dried fig. "For someone who still thinks ice just appears." You grin, exhausted, straw in your hair and plaster drying on your wrists, and somewhere deep inside the dome, the ice sighs. The sun's dipped behind the distant hills now, and the desert takes on that strange golden hush, like the world's holding its breath. You're walking back from the yakchal, your muscles sore but your spirit weirdly light, and then you hear it. A whisper. Not from a person, not from the wind, from the dome. You stop, turn slowly, and squint at the old structure. Of course, it's silent, but your guide swears it spoke once, centuries ago, not in Persian, not in anything human. In Jinn. Welcome to the Folklore Files. For all its mud-brick brilliance and mathematical mastery, the yakchal also lives in the realm of legend. And tonight, under the emerging stars, we dig into the stranger stuff. The stories whispered around fires. The ones nobody writes down, but everyone knows. The most famous tale? The Ice Jinn. According to local legend, the first yakchal was not built by men, but whispered into form by a creature older than sand, a being made of cold mist and starlight, trapped in the desert after a failed wager with the moon. The villagers, desperate for relief, offered it silence and shadow. In return, it taught them the secret of keeping snow from dying. Of course, historians roll their eyes, but also, they can't explain how some yakchals stay cool even in unseasonable heat. Coincidence? Or just very good goat hair paste? Another tale speaks of the builder with no shadow. He appeared one summer, cloaked in white, and offered to build a dome that would keep winter safe. He worked for 30 days without speaking. The morning after the dome was completed, he vanished. No tracks, no tools, and not a single bird would perch on that Yakchal's dome for 7 years. Locals still say it was too perfect, too round, as if it had been carved from a single piece of sky. Children naturally love these stories. One particularly persistent rumor claims that if you fall asleep inside a Yakchal and dream of snow, the jinn will leave you a cold pomegranate as a gift. Not a bad deal, really, but it's not just jinn. Other tales speak of ice spirits who live in the walls and protect the structure from rot and rust. People have claimed to hear humming from inside, low, melodic, and always just out of tune. One fringe theory suggests the domes themselves resonate at a frequency that aligns with coolness vibrations. You'd think it was nonsense until you nap in one on a 44-degree-C day and wake up feeling like your soul wore a mint leaf. Folklorists argue that these myths likely stem from the reverence people felt toward Yakchals. After all, these buildings defied nature. In a land where the sun could crack stone, the idea of a space that cradled frost was unsettling, sacred even. Some communities held ceremonies when opening the Yakchal for the season. A small bowl of rosewater poured at the threshold. A whispered poem, a moment of silence. Maybe for the jinn, maybe just for respect. And of course there are stories of those who disrespected the dome. One fable tells of a merchant who tried to sell Yakchal ice at double the price during a heat wave. That night, every ice block he owned turned to salt. No explanation. He left town, never returned. Another tale involves a wandering musician who slept too close to a Yakchal and woke up singing only in rhymes. His family claimed he was cursed. He claimed he was finally interesting. Some even believe that the geometry of the dome holds mystical significance, that its curve mirrors the belly of the earth or the eye of a sleeping god, that sleeping beneath, one realigns your energy or possibly your attitude. You look back at the dome, its outline now softened by dusk. A gentle breeze rustles the reed mats stacked beside it. Somewhere, a goat sneezes. Could it all be just superstition? Of course. But still, you pick up a small stone, smooth and cool from the ground. Place it gently by the Yakchal's entrance, just in case. Behind you, Palavan smirks. Paying rent to the dome's spirits? You shrug. Better safe than sweaty. He laughs, deep and warm, and tosses you a date. That's the first lesson of this place, he says. Respect the dome. You don't have to believe in jinn, but you do have to believe in shade. As the stars prick through the sky like tiny, disapproving bureaucrats, you settle down near the Yakchal's base, head resting on a folded robe. You listen for humming, for whispers, for cold air that smells faintly of stories, and maybe, just maybe, for the sound of snowflakes remembering where they came from. You're staring at a rusted metal fan dangling from a ceiling beam in a modern Persian home. It's spinning lazily, powered by a grid, humming like a tired bee. It's functional, efficient, and yet a little sad, because just outside this home, in the shadow of a half-collapsed Yakchal, you've seen the past do it better. So here's the million-dinar question. If ancient Persians invented passive refrigeration, wind catchers, and iced desserts in 500 BCE, why didn't they invent the electric fridge? Let's unravel that very chill mystery. First things first, technological progress is rarely a straight line. It's more like a slightly drunk camel, stubborn, unpredictable, and often distracted by something shiny. While ancient Persia absolutely had the brains and ingenuity, certain limiting factors kept them from leaping ahead to compressor coils and freon tanks. Let's start with need. In ancient Persia, the cooling solutions they had, Yakchals, Qanats, bad gears, worked. They weren't perfect, but they were scalable, renewable, and required zero electricity, which, minor spoiler, didn't exist yet. The empire had access to desert winds, mountainous snow, and a population willing to wake up at 3 a.m. to scrape ice off a mud pool. Why invent something else when your clay domes are getting the job done? Historians also note that the infrastructure required for true mechanical refrigeration, metalworking at a certain scale, advanced thermodynamics, sealed systems, was centuries away. Theoretical groundwork for understanding pressure, compression, and heat transfer wasn't seriously developed until the 17th century in Europe. That said, the Persian Empire was hardly lacking in innovation. They developed sophisticated plumbing, intricate irrigation, chemical distillation methods for perfumes, and some forms of negative pressure cooling using evaporation. Some scholars even argue that had the empire survived certain political collapses, we might have seen mechanical refrigeration centuries earlier. In fact, there are tantalizing hints that later Islamic scientists like Al-Razi and Al-Jazari experimented with temperature regulation using water pressure, pulley systems, and rudimentary fans. Al-Jazari, for example, designed a cooling fountain that used hydropower to deliver chilled water in a cyclical system. It wasn't a fridge, but it was flirty with the idea. Still, the invention of the electric refrigerator as we know it required an entirely different historical cocktail: industrial metallurgy, electric grids, mass production, and a post-industrial revolution obsession with convenience. By that point, Persia, now Iran, had gone through dynastic upheavals, colonization pressure, and shifting geopolitical priorities. Ice became something you plugged in for, not prayed over. And ironically, the arrival of modern fridges nearly wiped out Yakchal culture. By the mid-20th century, electric refrigeration was sweeping through cities. Homes, shops, and even tea houses replaced their domes and clay jars with humming metal boxes. Ice became less sacred, more mundane. Straw bundles were traded for freezer trays. And the proud old barf ban ice stewards, out of a job, one fringe. Theory, even more poetic than probable, suggests that the fall of Yakchals was less about technology and more about memory. That people forgot how to wait for coolness, that they stopped listening to the wind and started trusting the outlet. But in recent decades, something surprising has happened. A revival. Environmental architects and sustainability nerds have rediscovered Yakchals, wind catchers, and qanats as solutions to modern energy problems. Cities battling 45 degrees Celsius heat waves now study Persian passive cooling for answers. There's a whole movement toward bioclimatic design, fancy term for buildings that work with nature instead of punching it in the face. Some modern eco-villages in Iran and even in parts of India, Morocco, and Arizona are experimenting with Yakchal-inspired refrigeration, clay domes, underground pits, evaporation cooling, all without plugging anything in. There are even art installations paying homage to the geometry and silence of ancient Persian cold. So while Persia didn't invent the fridge, they arguably invented the mindset, the principle, the idea that coolness isn't always about machinery. Sometimes it's about patience, placement, proportion. You sit now in the half-light of dusk, one hand resting on the curve of a centuries-old dome, the other holding a steel cup of cold mint tea. Inside the modern house, the refrigerator hums. Outside, the wind hums too, but slower, softer, older. And suddenly you feel the answer wasn't lost, just waiting for us to cool down. You're seated cross-legged on a rolled-up carpet, flipping through an old leather-bound notebook. The handwriting is spidery and British, of course it is, and the date in the corner reads 1859. You're not in ancient Persia anymore. You're in the thick of its discovery by Western archaeologists, many of whom arrived sunburned, skeptical, and woefully underdressed. The subject of the page: the ice houses of the East. Welcome to the era of colonial confusion, when European explorers, military surveyors, and missionary scholars stumbled upon Yakchals. They didn't quite know what to make of them. Some called them strange mud cones. Others referred to them as desert bunkers or ritual huts. A few took one look at the inner chambers and decided, quite wrongly, they were burial mounds. It took a while before someone realized, wait, this thing keeps ice in the desert? Cue skeptical mustaches twitching across the empire. One early account written by a British officer stationed near Yazd described the yakchal as a native method of cooling quite outside the laws of physics. He noted with equal parts admiration and disbelief that the dome remained colder at noon than an English cellar in January. Of course, this bafflement often came with condescension. The default colonial narrative was that such cleverness couldn't possibly come from the Orient without foreign influence. Perhaps it was Greek knowledge, or Roman leftovers, or ancient aliens, because when in doubt, blame the stars. Historians still debate whether this skepticism was honest, ignorance, or a convenient excuse to maintain a superiority complex. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle of a gin and tonic haze. Meanwhile, local scholars, many of whom had been preserving, repairing, and studying yakchals for generations, found themselves explaining the basics over and over again to wide-eyed men in pith helmets. Passive cooling, one engineer reportedly said. You build thick, you build round, you use shadows and wind. The response? Fascinating. We'll attribute it to the Greeks, but not everyone was dismissive. A handful of curious minds, like French architect André Godard and German engineer Wilhelm Lenz, began mapping yakchals, studying their materials, and writing papers that suggested maybe, just maybe, this ancient desert tech was ahead of its time. Godard even proposed using similar geometry in modern European architecture. By the 20th century, more detailed studies emerged, confirming what Persian communities had known for millennia, that these structures worked not because of magic, but because of physics. One particularly dramatic paper from 1932 compared a functioning yakchal in Kerman to early refrigeration systems in London. The conclusion? The Persian structure held its internal temperature more consistently and used zero energy. That's right. A mud dome in a desert beat out a coal-powered ice house in foggy England. Still, many Western institutions treated yakchals as historical oddities, something to sketch, photograph, and leave behind. A few were even dismantled under modernization plans, replaced with concrete warehouses and electric coolers that, ironically, broke down every summer. Fringe theories began to emerge too. Some colonial-era travelogues claimed yakchals were accidental discoveries by early Persian shepherds who found naturally cool caves and decided to replicate them. Others, more fanciful, suggested the structures were part of a mystical cult dedicated to cold worship. Spoiler, no such cult has been confirmed, but if you'd like to start one, you have my vote. And yet, through all the misunderstanding, the yakchal endured. Villagers ignored the reports, fixed the cracks, and kept stacking ice. It wasn't about proving a point to outsiders. It was about chilling the melon slices for Grandma's birthday. Today, many of those early field notes sit in museum basements, collected, scanned, and sometimes misfiled under miscellaneous architecture. You can almost hear the buildings themselves sighing with patience, waiting for someone to finally pay attention. And now they are. Modern engineers are poring over those old sketches, measuring shadow lengths and dome angles with laser scanners. Academics are revisiting the dismissive notes and adding footnotes like, actually, this is incredible. It's a quiet reckoning. A long overdue admission that maybe, just maybe, some of the smartest engineers in history wore sandals, carried clay, and didn't speak Latin. You close the notebook, the sun slanting in through the window like melted gold. Outside, a dome waits, ancient, cracked, smiling. Not because it needs validation, but because it knew the cold would come around again. You're crouched in the shade of a crumbling dome, fingers tracing the rough, uneven edges of a wall that once kept summer at bay. It's quiet here. Too quiet, really. The kind of silence that hums with absence. The Yakchal is dying. Or maybe it's already gone. This is the slow decline. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment when the last block of ice melted with a sad violin soundtrack. No mourners in ceremonial goat hair vests. Just slow erosion of purpose, of memory, of straw. By the early 20th century, Persia was changing fast. Urbanization was on the rise, and imported technology brought things like steel coolers, kerosene-powered chillers, and, eventually, electric refrigeration. At first, they were novelties. Fancy items for hotels, embassies, and overconfident dentists. But it didn't take long. Fridges got cheaper, smaller, flashier. Suddenly, the coolness that had once required a team of sweaty workers, 6 camels, and the blessing of the ice djinn could be summoned with a flick of a switch. And while the first-generation machines were loud, prone to leaking, and sometimes electrocuted curious pets, they were convenient. The Yakchal, meanwhile, asked, too much, it needed patching. It needed sweeping. It required a certain poetic understanding of shadows and wind. And let's be honest, people were tired. The future came humming and shiny, offering ice trays and freezer lights. Who could resist? So the domes were left, First, just a few. The ones furthest from the city or whose keepers had moved away. Then more, and more. Until even the central Yakchal, the one near the bazaar that used to be the pride of the town, was reduced to a nesting site for pigeons, and a particularly smug cat. Historians still debate the timeline. Was it the oil boom? The railways? The rise of plastic cups? Maybe all of them. But the truth is, by the 1950s, Yakchals had largely disappeared from daily life. Not entirely, though. Some were repurposed, turned into storage sheds, chicken coops. One, allegedly, became a makeshift cinema, though you had to sit on straw bales, and the acoustics were, according to one reviewer, like watching a movie inside a startled goat. Others became ghostly landmarks. Children were warned not to play too close. It's haunted, elders would mutter, or worse, unstable. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside at night. Some came back claiming they heard whispers. Some came back with selfies. All came back with hay in their socks. In time, whole generations grew up knowing the domes only as weird ruins. Their purpose? Forgotten. Or worse, misremembered. That's where they stored treasure, one child insists. Prison, says another. Space observatory, mutters a conspiracy uncle over tea. By the 1980s, a handful of architects and historians began to panic. They saw what was being lost. Not just the buildings, but the knowledge. The quiet, practical genius that once turned frozen puddles into prestige. A few domes were documented, measured, photographed. Articles appeared in journals. Terms like passive evaporative cooling were tossed around. A revival threatened to begin. But again, the world was too loud. Progress meant electric fans, window units, rooftop air conditioners. The Yakchal had no blinking lights, no moving parts, no branding. And so it faded. Some domes collapsed under their own weight, especially after heavy rain seasons. Others were dismantled to make space for roads, factories, or the world's most optimistic parking lots. You run your fingers along a jagged edge, the clay flaking gently. A small lizard peeks out from a crack and blinks at you, unimpressed. You get it. You're late to the party. But not too late. Because not all was lost. Some Yakchals survived, stubbornly. Kept alive by villagers too practical to toss away a working system. Restored by enthusiasts who loved geometry more than convenience. And archived by sleepy academics who saw in those domes a quiet rebellion against waste and noise. You stand up, brushing straw from your knees. The dome behind you leans slightly now, like a tired uncle, but it's still standing, still casting, a shadow, still cool inside. A child runs past with a toy made of sticks and string, chasing an echo. You smile, unsure if it's the future or the past tugging at your sleeve. Probably both. You're in a modern courtyard now. Sleek lines, solar panels, the gentle whir of something engineered humming just beneath the soundscape. But in the corner of the courtyard, nestled between polished stone and a cactus that looks like it might have an Instagram account, stands a familiar silhouette. A dome, clay, round, cool to the touch. The yak chow is back. Well, not quite as it was, but reborn, reimagined, reinvited into the modern world by architects, environmentalists, and people who just really miss being able to nap in an ice cave without worrying about electricity bills. This is the comeback tour of one of Persia's finest ideas. The revival began slowly, often quietly, in academic papers and sustainable design conferences. Architects around the world, particularly in arid regions, started studying traditional Persian structures for solutions to contemporary climate challenges. And the yak chow? It rose like a humble hero from the footnotes. What if, they wondered, we didn't fight the heat with more gadgets? What if we returned to domes, clay, shadow, and airflow? In Iran, a handful of conservationists began restoring old yak chows, not to store ice, but to show people how they once worked. These became educational hubs. One in Kerman now features a museum-like setup, complete with straw bales, old ice tools, and diagrams that make you feel like you're standing inside a geometry thesis that smells faintly of goat. Elsewhere, things got more experimental. A community in Yazd launched a sustainability project using a modernized yakchal structure to preserve vegetables and dairy for nearby villages, completely off-grid. No wires, no hums, just mud, math, and nighttime discipline. In India, architects working in Rajasthan took notes from Persian yakchals and adapted them to create similar underground coolers for grains and medicines, especially valuable in rural areas with unreliable power. Even in the tech-happy zones of the world, people are curious. A startup in California tried integrating yakchal principles into wine cellars and outdoor storage units. Their pitch? Ancient Persia meets Silicon Valley. A bit much, but hey, the renderings are gorgeous. Scholars continue to debate how exactly these revived versions should function. Should they replicate the original ice-making process, focus on passive food storage, or serve as architectural statements about sustainability? One fringe but charming proposal suggests building mini yakchals in urban parks, free to enter, cool inside, and perfect for quiet reflection or reading. Like nature's little library, but instead of books, you borrow your body temperature back. You visit one such prototype in a suburb. It's smaller, maybe 3 meters tall, built with rammed earth and polished with traditional lime wash. Inside, it's peaceful. There's a soft bench, a central well for airflow, and a guest book that includes entries like, "Sat here for 20 minutes, cooled my soul. No AC, no problem. I proposed to my partner in here. She said yes. Also, it was 43 degrees outside." You smile, because you feel it too. It's not just the temperature, it's the stillness, the silence, the sense that this space, despite being a dome made of mud, respects your presence. A teacher leads a group of students through. She explains how this yakchal doesn't store ice, but cools passively through evaporative design, dome shape, and ground thermal inertia. The kids nod, wide-eyed, holding reusable water bottles and asking if it could be used for keeping popsicles alive during a picnic. Valid question, honestly. Meanwhile, artists have begun incorporating yakchal themes into their work. Murals, sculptures, even performance pieces where dancers move like water cooling through clay. It's dramatic, it's dusty, it's delightful, and it's spreading. Because beyond the aesthetics, beyond the nostalgia, the return of the yakchal reflects something deeper, a yearning to slow down, to find comfort in silence, to build things that don't need recharging every night, and the timing couldn't be better. As cities grapple with rising temperatures, power outages, and the spiritual fatigue of living inside buzzing machines, the idea of stepping into a space that's cooled by shadow and wind feels downright rebellious. Back in the courtyard, a designer runs her fingers along the curve of her own backyard yakchal, a personal project, half art, half passive storage for herbs and yogurt. She grins. It doesn't beep, she says, but it never breaks. You nod, feeling the clay under your palm. Still cool, still wise, still here. You lie down now, finally, in the hush of twilight, on a thick woven mat placed just at the base of a newly restored yakchal. It rises above you, a gentle curve against the deepening blue of the desert sky. The dome doesn't glow. It doesn't blink, but it feels alive, like it's watching over you. There's a breeze, soft and consistent, threading its way through the courtyard. The air is cool now, not just by desert standards, but genuinely soothing. Your skin exhales, your thoughts soften. The ground beneath you still holds the chill from the dome's shadow. You curl onto your side and close your eyes for a moment, just listening. The creak of straw under your elbow, the murmur of a distant bird, a whisper of wind slipping across clay and time. This space, is more than architecture. It's memory made breathable. Because in the final tally, the yakchal wasn't about ice, it was about possibility. The possibility that in the harshest environments we could carve out corners of comfort, that we could borrow winter and hold it through summer, that we could build relief, not with noise or brute force, but with curves, patience, and dusty hands. Somewhere a child giggles. Somewhere else, someone drops a ceramic cup and the clink echoes once before dissolving into silence. You remember all the things this dome has held, chilled melon in copper bowls, wedding sorbet, pickled lemons for treaties, warm hands cupping cold water after a long day hauling dates. And now, it holds you. As the stars bloom above, one by one, you feel the world slow. The stories of geometry and goat hair, of wind catchers and whispering spirits, they blur gently, like dreams sliding into place before sleep. The yakchal doesn't hum. It hushes. Its silence wraps around you like a soft blanket, like a lullaby whispered in clay. And as your breath evens out, the dome stands quietly in the dark, just as it has for 1,000 years, still keeping things cool, still keeping secrets, still cradling the quiet.